In this week's review we're going to take a look at Cold Fear, a survival horror game that was developed by Darkworks, published by Ubisoft and was released on the PS2 and Xbox in March of 2005. But before we get started, I just wanted to say that if you like this video, please do hit the like button as it helps the channel. If you're looking for more videos like this, then hit the subscribe button, and if you've played this game before, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so comment down below. Now let's move on to the review. This game opens up with a team of Navy SEALs being dropped off onto a Russian ship in the middle of the ocean for reasons, and things turn sour straight away and the entire team is mysteriously killed. So after seeing their Navy SEALs murdered in a matter of minutes, the CIA decides they'll do the smart thing and send in more people, but this time putting the call out to the US Coast Guard. One of the members of the US Coast Guard is our protagonist, Tom Hansen, and just as soon as they touch down on the ship, everyone in that second group is wiped out, except our hero Tom, of course. As he begins to investigate the ship, he is initially involved in scraps and firefights with terrified Russian soldiers that have managed to survive whatever happened on board, but the further he pushes on, the more he begins to discover something much more terrible. The ship is full of infected and mutated people and creatures, and as Hansen fights through all of the monsters in his way, he also has to gather information from any survivors willing to talk and figure out exactly what happened to everyone. From here the story goes in the general Resident Evil secret science experiment direction, and even though it's not that original, I will say that it was delivered well and is also just silly enough to make it enjoyable.
Now here, take this experimental. The bolts are chemically treated to distract them. It may save your life.
Taken at face value, this is a Resident Evil 4 knockoff. It is too hard not to draw similarities between the two games, which is very unfair to Cold Fear, as RE4 came out only a few months prior, suggesting that Ubisoft couldn't have copied Capcom, but instead was just unfortunate enough to make a near identical but lesser game that would release so soon after Resident Evil 4 that it looked much worse in comparison. Cold Fear was interesting for me to play, as my first impressions of it were not very high at all, but the more I got into the game, the more positive I felt about it. The overall structure to everything is of course just like a Resident Evil game. It's one big space to explore as you figure out how to unlock all of the areas of the ship, and along the way you'll build up a collection of weapons from a pistol to an AK, a shotgun and even a spear gun. There is a fair bit of backtracking which can be confusing at times, but luckily the game is quite brief, so it's not the end of the world. In the first hour or so, I was not a fan of how the game controlled, as the aiming takes some getting used to. On top of this, the big mechanic on show here is the way in which the environment is constantly swaying from side to side to simulate the feeling of being on a ship at sea. Eventually I learned to pick my shots a bit better, my accuracy for headshots improved, and I also learned that sometimes it's just best to run away rather than waste my ammo. So slowly over time the ship rocking from side to side became less frustrating and more of a cool and unique feature for the game. For me, this entire game fell into a weird spot of being a little annoying with some of its controls and systems, but just entertaining enough that I pushed through and gradually learned to forgive its flaws, because I appreciated the ambition and what it was going for. There is a learning curve to Cold Fear as you adjust to the stiff movement of the character, the awkward placement of the camera, and relentless enemy attack patterns that at first make the game somewhat overwhelming, but once that adjustment period has passed, there's an argument to call this a hidden gem. Also thrown into the mix are the cool physics and environment-based features that give the game a little more flavour. There are plenty of barrels for you to blow up, gas pipes for you to burst, and electrical wiring for you to damage to help you on your way. Plus the spear gun attracts the zombies to a specific location, meaning you can line up an explosive multi-kill if you are skilled enough. In addition to this is the way the sea can mess with you from time to time. Water can splash up and reduce your vision, and sometimes will just knock you right over, and at other times, if you're not careful, the rocking of the ship will almost kill you instantly. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that Cold Fear isn't perfect, but it offers a lot to like. In In the graphics department, the title hasn't aged too badly. I imagine at the time it actually looked quite nice. It has some good texture work and modelling, the lighting is really well done, and the water effects are genuinely impressive. What also gives everything a bit more life is watching the environment react to the movement of the ship. Instead of it feeling like a static backdrop, it feels more alive and realistic as a result. Some of the character models could have used a bit more polish, and oddly enough I think the in-engine visuals look better than the pre-rendered cutscene visuals, simply because they are more consistent and feature more detail, but really these are all minor issues in the grand scheme of things. I wouldn't say there is too much to talk about when it comes to audio. The sound design isn't really a blemish or a standout feature. There is some good atmospheric weather sound effects or pouring of rain and the crackle of thunder, but as it's mixed with a generic soundtrack, the impact of it all is dampened. On a similar note, the sound of the weapons do lack that punch that I personally enjoy from my shooters. The voice acting is delivered well enough, but isn't noteworthy. However, I will give credit to the sound design of the zombie-like creatures, who sound just as terrifying as you'd want them to. Cold Fear is a perfect example of how important timing can be. If it were released a year earlier, it could have gone on to be a quiet hit of the 6th generation, but released a few months after Resident Evil 4, it was viewed as a clone of lesser quality that only went on to sell 70,000 copies in its first 12 months. Does it have issues? You bet it does, and the fact that the game has designated save points with no autosave feature is probably enough to turn some gamers off. What you do have here is a game with an adjustment period and some flaws, but certainly isn't lacking in ambition. I eventually found it to be a lot of fun to play, and its story is the kind of cheesy that you get from this era that I personally love. Depending on what you're willing to put up with will be the biggest deciding factor on whether you're going to like this game, but it may just grow on you, so my advice is give it a shot and maybe you'll find a hidden gem.
God.